I'm excited to talk a little bit about my own personal spiritual connection to performing and sharing of my creative gifts. Just in talking about the creative process in general. But so last night I had my first effectively big boy gig in a long time, probably 3 years or so. We played at Native Hostel on the east side of Austin, Texas, which is an absolutely beautiful room. Really cool little listening room. And we had such an amazing crowd come out, and it felt really good to be back on stage and playing and performing. And in a lot of ways, it felt kind of like a communal catharsis in the midst of this pandemic, for people to come out and listen to music and enjoy community again, which was a really beautiful thing. Also last night, some kind of old ghosts and demons of mine resurfaced, because I guess 5 years ago, when I was first in Austin, and I first had this idea that I wanted to play music professionally to some degree, where I had decided that I really want to play music as a living. I've really spent a lot of time kind of with that past version of myself over the past couple of years, and really done a lot of healing, which has been centered on understanding my connection to music, but also understanding how for so much of my life I've used it as a vehicle for acceptance and validation and approval and praise. And the 5 years ago Mike, who was, a couple years out of college, really had a connection to music that was engulfed in the need for other people's approval, the need for people to like my music as much as I like my music. And that clearly and obviously affected my decision making, how I approached, everything from booking to Instagram to who I would talk to after shows. And it was just generally a spiritual posture of needing things from other people, or wanting things, desiring things, particularly status, and just the kind of power that being on stage and getting people's approval that just kind of inherently comes with it. So up until, just very recently, I've kind of shied away from playing music live, because I've kind of lived in this paradigm of, well, I know that about myself, so I'm just not going to play music for people. I'm going to, I'm happy to just keep my guitars out at my house, and, I'll play in the living room, essentially. And I just won't go out and perform, because I know that about myself. But thankfully, I have a really good friend named Dan Radin, who I play cello with, who really believes in me as a creative person and a songwriter and a performer. And even when I don't like it, he encourages me to share those gifts, which I'm very grateful for. So recently we started playing back up, and kind of to bring it back to last night, this was our first real show where it felt like all of those kind of worldly desires of, power, approval, praise, those were on the table. Those were available. And they were, I think we played a great set last night. We sounded really good. And we're getting tight on the music we're playing. And because of that, people were very, quick. And I'm grateful that they were. But, there was a lot of praise being tossed out. There was a lot of approval. I was getting validated in the ways that I used to very subconsciously need to be validated. And that experience, that ecosystem last night brought up so many feelings for me. And I've really been so emotional this morning. I have been crying. I have just been feeling zapped of energy. I've been emotionally drained this morning. And I've spent some time talking to God about it and journaling and talking to friends about it and Alyssa about it. And I feel comfortable naming that now. And I think it's worth sharing because I think to some degree this is something that we all experience. We all are out in the world interacting with people, and what was coming up for me last night is the temptation to go back there and seeing how available it was to want to connect with people for what they can give me or to get their approval. And that now that I lived there for so long of my life, I wrote in my journal this morning, I thought it was a good way of putting it. I lived in that country without a passport for so long that now when I see it in other people, because of course we're in Austin, Texas, this is it's a hip crowd, people are moving and shaking. There's always going to be an element of that in human interactions. And I was picking up on that last night, that kind of like attachment, that desire to connect from a place of not having. So when I was picking up on that last night, it made me feel it made me feel a couple things. One, I think my first reaction, because I'm typically judgmental first, it was a gross feeling. It made me repulsed, and it made me want to keep people at an arm's length. And I think what has made me so sad this morning and so emotional is that a lot of what I was feeling and what I'm still feeling is grief. I've grieving my own experience, my own autobiography of that time in my life where I was so consumed with what other people thought about me. And obviously I'm not talking like I fucking crossed that mountain, but I think that time in my life I was so subconsciously or unconsciously consumed by people's thoughts of me. Now I can at least know it. I still want other people's approval desperately, but I was just grieving that I had gone through that and that I'm still going through that in some ways. And also I'm just also thankful, and this is a prayer that I offered with Dan and I before we went on last night. And I just wanted to make this very clear between the two of us because I know myself and I know what was going to be offered. The prayer was simply stating that there is nothing that this audience or these people can give us tonight that we don't already have. Their approval or their disapproval, their praise or their disinterest, none of that is as important or as real as the mutual admiration we have for each other between Dan and I, and for how God feels about us, how that creative force that created us, how already proud and loving they are of us, and how we each individually feel about ourselves. Like, I feel comfortable now saying that, like, I'm really proud of myself as a creative person, and I have a very healthy relationship with my creativity, and it's moved from a kind of a shame-based system to a maybe like I'm more inspired by curiosity than driven by shame and fear. So just being able to say that before the gig was so powerful. And I was reading through some of the Gospel of Matthew this morning, where the devil, Jesus is out in the wilderness, which is such a beautiful metaphor. He's been without food, water for 40 days, and the devil comes and tempts him with power. And he takes him up to this hill and shows him all of the kingdoms of the world and says, if you'll just bow down to me, you can have all of this. And I was just crying thinking about, like, that was so me. That was me 5 years ago. If I had been offered that opportunity, I would have taken it outright without thinking about it. And now I can at least be conscious of that drive in me and in that desire, and knowing when I'm being offered power and acceptance and validation from others, and how fickle and another Jesus metaphor is the building your house on rock or building it on sand. Building your self-esteem on other people's approval is building a house on sand. And reading through that passage in the Sermon on the Mount this morning, that was such an illuminating, it made so much sense. It was so clear to me after these past couple years and after last night. And sort of to wrap this up, I was thinking about how funny it is when, just what a funny word it is when people describe themselves as saved. I think a lot of that goes into this idea of like a heaven and hell are out of this world. And my spiritual belief is very much that heaven and hell are places on earth and places that we inhabit in our heads and our hearts and our souls. And for me, being saved is not in the sense that I know I'm going to go to heaven when I die. It's not part of my spiritual theology. Being saved is very much what I've been talking about. I feel saved from being desperate for other people's approval. I feel saved that I can just go out and have fun playing music, and that is the greatest gift. So this feels very good to get off my chest. And I just feel so cleansed this morning. I feel very healed. Because as I continue playing music, and I know that I can't, my path is not to hide myself in the corner, in my room, playing only for myself. And it's also not to dive in wholeheartedly, trying to give these gifts away cheaply. Like, I understand this morning, and I think the metaphor is very clear, that the cross that I am to carry in this life is that of sharing my gift, but also constantly freeing myself and saving myself from the need for other people to appreciate it. Because that, through my lived experience, has only resulted in heartbreak and disillusion. And ultimately sin, which, in the etymological sense of sin, is missing the mark of how to live life. That's your sermon for the day. Amen. Have a great day.